Today's meditation will be led by David Bryant.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you to Kat for coming back. She was gone for a while, and we did miss her, and we love her, and glad to see her be the face of Open Circle. Now, many of you have the end-of-life things. Would you please put them on your lap and close them while we do the meditation, please? Meditation. I think it's catchy, Kat. Those of us who, with a poetic pen, know that deep listening requires the deep listening that poetry requires takes us to a place in the heart where we meet what shows up. That's what a poet does. As I read Wendell Berry's poem, let your mind go to what Wendell Berry invites. So feel this as an invitation. I go among trees and sit still. I go among trees and sit still. All my stirring becomes quiet around me. All my stirring becomes quiet around me, like circles on water. My tasks lie in their places where I left them, asleep like cows. In the trees in the quiet, he says, my tasks lie in their places where I left them, asleep like cows. Then, what I am afraid of comes. Then what I am afraid of comes. I live for a while in its sight. What I fear in it leaves. What I fear in it leaves. And the fear of it leaves me. Then what I am afraid of comes. I live for a while in its sight, and what I fear in it leaves. And the fear of it leaves me. It sings, and I hear its song. I hear fear's song when I sit in the trees and be still. Then what I am afraid of comes. I live for a while in its sight. What I fear in it leaves, and the fear of it leaves me. And it sings, and I hear its song. Thank you very much.
That was beautiful. Today's presentation, End of Life. Dr. Sam Thelin is going to talk to us and discuss with us the meaning of death and provide an overview of the dying process in natural and disease situations. He is going to talk with us about palliative care in terminal patients and in non-terminal patients, and common misconceptions about euthanasia. In short, he will teach us about options so we can make informed decisions in creating structured and formal plans and in communicating our end-of-life wishes. Dr. Sam, originally from Western New York State, holds degrees in general science, biology, and medicine. He worked and studied in Texas, then studied 4 years in Mexico where he obtained his medical license. His interest in emergency medicine started during his social service, and he continued in that field until recently expanding into private practice. Here he sees an increasing number of patients seeking personalized palliative care. Please welcome Dr. Sam.
I like the idea of the cup holder. That wasn't here last time, I don't think. That's very nice. Okay, there's a lot to discuss today. This could be done in probably a whole semester. I've got a lot of information I'm going to try to cram into a small amount of space. Afterwards, I'm open to questions as long as they'll let it stay here. Probably there will be questions afterwards. But what my intention is to basically dispel some myths. For a lot of people, the closest they've, and obviously a lot of people, obviously not everybody, a lot of their exposure to seeing dying is maybe to watch somebody on TV, and there's so much that is missed, so much that's not real. So I'm going to start off by defining death. Anybody have any ideas? They don't talk to me anymore. Okay. So basically, definition of death. The main definition that we have, and everybody can hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. The main definition we have is a legal definition. That's when it all comes down to it, you've got a certificate, and it says, okay, they were born, and this one says they're dead. Black and white. Sometimes they're like black and green, depends on the color of the certificate. But anyway, in order for the certificate to say they're dead, okay, somebody has to sign it. Different states, different countries are different. Here, it's going to be a doctor usually. Okay, so somebody has no heartbeat, they're not breathing, so a doctor basically says at this point that continuing any efforts, CPR, anything of that nature, is not going to do anything. A lot of times we'll give CPR for, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. Where do you cut the line? A doctor's going to say, okay, enough. And the other thing that we basically the doctor determines at this point, is recovery is not possible. This is in a hospital setting. Oftentimes they see the difference between the patient who was alive a minute ago and the patient's now dead, and they say, okay, at this time that happened. But when I ask a bunch of people, when I was working in a clinic, I asked them, well, what's your definition of death? And they gave me a lot of spiritual, religious definitions of death. Well, the person's at peace, their soul is at peace. And a lot of people have that conception, and you could ask 100 people and maybe get 100 different answers from that. Medical, you get clinical death, brain death, where do we go with this? We could even go into scientific, okay, different parts of the body die at different rates. There's parts of the body that are actually still alive for up to 3 days after you die. But that's a whole other thing. We're not going to go there too much today. Lack of brain activity. Okay, at what point do you consider the person dead? To us, looking from the outside, looking at a dead person, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a family, the separation, the communication is lost. To us, that's the biggest emotional thing is, we can't go talk to that person anymore. We can't say, hey, look what happened today. That communication is lost. That's a very major emotional aspect. However, I'm going to go a little bit more towards the view of the patient through most of this presentation. To the patient, what is death as far as the patient's concerned? Obviously, at the point where they're dead, I don't know. I would love to actually ask some of the patients that I've seen die. I'd like to say, did you suffer? Did we do it right? What could we have done different? I can't talk to them, at least not right now. But looking at them, whether alive, and from what we know scientifically, clinically, the patient, Sometimes they're afraid. Sometimes they're afraid of dying. I don't see that as much as oftentimes they're afraid of the pain. They're afraid of the unknown. Sometimes knowing the process, maybe just knowing that somebody will be there so they don't suffer in case that's, which often happens, that's a big issue. In the little handout that I made for everybody, almost everybody, I don't know how short we were, I printed out 201 copies. There, I put in there the Kubler-Ross model, and she basically described 5 stages of grief. And then later she basically said, okay, well, not everybody goes through all 5, not everybody goes through the 5 in the same order, but I'm going to go into those a little bit later, but, and that's an issue. But anyway, definition of death. You could ask a bunch of people, you could look it up, you can look at the medical books. This is my definition. Maybe somebody else shares it as well, but it's an energy state too low to support vital biochemical processes. It's irreversible and results in an equilibrium of normal steady state processes. What's steady state? What's equilibrium? Okay, imagine that you're washing your dishes in the sink and the little stopper isn't 100% and it leaks down. So you come up with, okay, if I just leave it on just enough, what comes in equals what goes out and it stays there. That would be like a steady state. That would be very overly simplistic, but you've got some sort of energy going in, energy going out, but everything pretty much stays the same. And then you've got equilibrium. Equilibrium is what happens when there's no energy pushing one way or another. It's, you know, for example, on cells, you may have certain ions that are higher concentration inside than outside or vice versa. When everything matches, the inside, the outside matches, that's equilibrium. That's, you know, true death. Or we can simply say the opposite of life. How do we define life? A little bit more complicated. Obviously, everybody has a philosophical view. We have our religious views. But let's quickly, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but I want to emphasize that this is not something simple. My definition again, okay, energy, without energy it's dead. Biochemistry, without biochemistry it's dead. And order are necessary to support life. Energy, as you can see there, I have a little picture of a mitochondria, which is, you know, in biology class, you know, the powerhouse of the cell. It makes ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the main source of energy in most of the body. But anyway, that's just, it makes energy. Okay, we have energy. Where does the energy come from originally? The mitochondria genetically actually only comes from the mother. The egg will actually have mitochondria in it, and of course as the cells divide, it goes on. Which brings up the whole question, you know, where does life start? But we'll go there later. Biochemistry, here I have a simple chemical reaction in the body, a biochemistry reaction, which is fueled by ATP, which is made by the mitochondria up above there. And then order. Order of what? A lot of people greatly underestimate the complexity necessary to support life. And I say, okay, we've got, that would be billion, about 3 billion base pairs of DNA. You could compare that to maybe memory in a computer. In a computer, it's binary, it's either on or off. In this case, you have 4 positions. And then, of course, you could go into bytes, which is 8 parts. In the human body, you only need 3 to code for things. But anyway, it's coding for 18,000 to as high as 22,000 genes in the body. All this is within each cell. Not in the whole, you don't have the whole, you don't have your foot to your head. Every cell contains this, with the exception of red blood cells. 19,000 different known proteins. That's a lot. That's a lot of different proteins. Consisting of structural proteins, enzymes, etc. And the continuous regulation of every biological function. Compared, you know, if you were to actually try to equal this, it would only come to maybe, you know, the DNA, if used as storage data, it would equivalent to about, you know, 2 gigabytes, which is not that much. But it's not digital. The body is not digital. You don't have parts that are on or off for the most part. Most things are grades. They're concentration grades. So anyway, let's go on to the next page. This is, when we first saw that in biology class, we thought, oh wow, that's pretty overwhelming. That's actually very basic. You don't have to remember this. There's no test on it afterwards. And this has most of the the anabolic things and some metabolic things in it. On the left, where the little sun is, that would pertain to photosynthesis. That doesn't pertain to humans. Almost everything else in here does. In the upper left, we have basically that's sugars. In the lower left, we have lipids. On the right, we have amino acids. On the right, towards the center, a little bit on the upper part, there's a little brown dot that's folic acid, and you can see its little tentacles touching into all sorts of stuff. And then at the bottom, middle, there's a little bit of yellow that pertains to the energy making. You can see some of the B vitamins and things working in there. Anyway, this is necessary just for the building blocks. If you turn to the next page. Now this is actually, because it says cell wall, that's actually for bacteria, the top one there in black. But that shows some of the basic cellular, what do I say, specialties working together. And there's little lines between each one of those little white dots. Down in the middle, we have typical interaction of enzymes working together. And I didn't print these large so that you could read everything. That's not the point. The point that I'm trying to make is that this is extremely complex. And this is just what we know. If you go down to the bottom part, for example, that's a reaction of the heart and the lung under stressful conditions in normal. We're not talking about COPD or anything like that. We're just talking normal conditions, just breathing, taking a deep breath. What would it do to the cells? If we look on the other page, the next one, there's a little bit more of a map there. Now remember I said there were 18,000 minimum genes. Actually, when they first started the Human Genome Project, we expected to find a lot more. As of right now, we're gonna just say that there's about 18,000. The rest of them don't seem to code for anything. Well, anyway, there's not 18,000 in that picture. There's maybe 100, 150, maybe. I didn't actually count them. I wasn't that bored. But the genes are the ones that are in black. They usually will have a couple letters followed by a number or two. They're black, and then there's some that are in red with white lettering. What's the difference? The ones in red lettering here, just these alone, if something goes wrong, you eventually will die. For example, in the middle, you will see, and you probably can't make it out unless you brought your glasses with you or your magnifying glass. In the middle, for example, it says MSK1. That's implicated in breast cancer, prostate cancer, some of the other cancers. If you look there at what would be about 11 o'clock from the center, it says BRCA1, breast cancer. That's actually what it was named for originally, BR, breast, CA cancer. However, that one's also implicated in various other cancers, again, prostate cancer and other cancers. All of these are interrelated. I could go into details on them, but I think I would probably put a couple people to sleep. But this is very basic. All this stuff has to work together, and it has to work correctly. If it doesn't, we die. So my conclusion, the reason I even wasted time putting in color photos there, is to make the emphasis that life is very organized energy to run many vital interdependent biological processes. Real permanent biological death is equilibrium. Everything just stays the same. One misconception that a lot of people have is that they say, oh, I was just talking to somebody and they just fell over dead. They just died. Nobody just dies. Even if you shoot somebody, they don't just die. You would still have at least up to 3 seconds of consciousness. There's a lot of processes that are still going. They might not be talking to you anymore, but nobody just dies. It's a series of events and changes that lead to death. Imagine the first example, really good example, made me think about it, was actually Spaceballs, the movie. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, where they're in the spaceship going at faster than light, and the one captain tells them to stop the ship because we can't stop. We have to slow down first. And it's true. When you're driving, you don't just stop the car. The car has to slow down, then it comes to a stop. Same with death. Nobody just up and dies. There's a series of processes that have to happen in order for it to happen. Sometimes it happens rapidly, sometimes it happens slowly, which gives me my own definition of acute death versus chronic death. Acute death, rapid series of events in an otherwise healthy person. Evelyn McGale. There's actually a picture of her dead, and it's a very famous picture. It's called A Beautiful Death, I think is the actual name of it. She committed suicide I guess late 50s, early 60s, I don't remember the actual year. She jumped from the Empire State Building, landed on top of a car. And she landed in a very beautiful pose. She looked very relaxed. In that case, everything was very, very rapid. Even her consciousness was lost rapidly. The shearing of the neurons and everything. That's a perfect example of an acute death. Case number 2, I just kind of throw in there because a lot of people have their DNR and stuff. Dr. Bagenholm, she froze to death. She was out skiing and she fell in water head first and she froze to death. But if you're ever skiing, you should always ski with doctors. She was skiing with 2 doctors. She had 40 minutes in cardiac arrest. She was in the water 80 minutes. She was actually alive for about 40 of that, and then the heart stopped. So she's 40 minutes dead in the water. About 2 hours with CPR. They basically didn't give up on her. And she's alive. She actually held the record for a while of the longest time that anybody could be dead and still be revived. They brought her back to life. Basically, none of the causes of death were irreversible. Limited biological damage. As of right now, the only biological damage that's really noted is she has nerve damage in her hands and feet. She can't feel things really well. But energy was still available. A lot of times in old age, when somebody dies, they literally run out of energy. The processes start going down slowly. She was perfectly healthy. She was skiing before this happened. I mean, there was nothing, biologically wrong with her. There were well-trained medical professionals, including the doctor that finally brought her back to life, who did it at a controlled rate. Had they brought her back to life quickly, she would have had intracranial pressure and she would have died. And the doctor was familiar with the cases, and the causes of death were reversed at the correct rate. I'm not going to go into the DNR, do not resuscitate, that much, but a lot of people will come and say, well, I don't want to be resuscitated. And it brings up a question. If somebody is dying in a nursing home and they're in their bed, okay, you could say, do not resuscitate. But then it gets into, well, what happens if, let's say that they're in the dining hall and they choke on a biscuit. Somebody could choke and die. And what would be the series of events leading to their death? Okay, well, obviously no oxygen. Carbon dioxide buildup. Carbon dioxide in the blood becomes carbonic acid. Change in pH of the blood causes fibrillation, heart stop, patient's dead. What if you remove the airway block? You pull the biscuit out. You give them oxygen, chest compressions, and everything. You reverse the cause of their death. Would you want resuscitated? Most people would. Be careful. When you do not resuscitate, think about it. I give an example of a chronic death here also. Series of events, usually over months to years, in an unhealthy person slowly leads to a condition not compatible with life. And we require reversing months or years of events within minutes to avoid inevitable death. This is something where DNR would be feasible because it's not possible to revive somebody. You can't reverse years of damage in a few minutes or a few seconds. It is impossible. In the case I give here is a diabetic patient, and I get this a lot. Somebody, they're up 500, 600. I don't feel anything. I feel fine. And usually they will, as long as the changes are not, going up and down, the fluctuations. They're not necessarily going to feel anything right away. Vascular walls is going to cause vascular damage. Neuropathy, damage to the nerves, which can affect, can give leg pain and everything. But also, you've got nerves in the whole digestive tract. You get somebody that has long-term neuropathy from diabetes. A lot of times, a whole lot of distension, constipation, everything just slows down. It doesn't work right. So you get a little appetite, lack of nutrients. You'll eventually at some point get kidney damage, the heart will have some damage, and at some point you'll have cardiac overload and the patient will die. CPR, can we reverse all of that in 5 minutes? No, we can't. So on the DNR, you could say, okay, do not resuscitate me ever. What happens if you choke on a biscuit? Okay, he didn't want it. Okay. I trust my doctor's decision. It may be a doctor there, maybe somebody else there, maybe a nurse, it may just be a care worker. Do you trust their decision? Maybe. Usually they're going to err on the side of giving them CPR. Actually, my wife and I were watching some videos of people that were giving CPR to people that were still alive, and the person was trying to push them off of them. You know, some people are a little bit over anxious to give CPR. I trust any medical professional's decision. Well, sometimes you have to. Sometimes you don't always have your favorite doctor, you know, where things happen. And then of course you could say, I don't want a DNR. You know, plug me in. You know, whatever happens, I think that there's a good chance that something will happen. You need to be clear. You need to be clear to whoever's going to be taking care of you, if you're in a health care facility with your doctor, or having it in your wallet. A lot of people simply say, you know, do not resuscitate. Well, do not resuscitate under what conditions? Be careful. The main thing about having a DNR, a do not resuscitate order, or knowing that the patient doesn't want it, is it oftentimes will spare the doctor having to put on a show. You know, we get somebody coming in and, you know, they died 10 minutes in the road coming over here. You know, we know that there's nothing we can do for them, but the patient, you know, the family drove them all the way over here. They expect something. And so you sit there and you go, okay, let's put on, you know, let's go ahead and do it. And they put on a show. This happens so often. And, you know, the family needs to know sometimes there's no hope. The doctor, it's nice that he knows that he doesn't have to put on a show, or the nurses. And so it's important. It's important to have that. It's important to communicate, as I'll go into here. Let's go into the actual dying. Some people will die a simple, painless death. Not all will. Natural death process. And I put the emphasis on natural because it will come to this a little bit later about natural versus unnatural. It's a slow process. It takes years. Generally, you have to get old before you die, generally. Some people have disease states, but then that's not natural. In a natural death, you're going to grow old, processes are going to happen, and everything slows down. And then at some point, gradually, in a matter of hours, things will become quite altered. Energy levels will go down, often affecting respiration. And if you're around somebody when they're dying, it can be a little unnerving because you'll notice that the extremities will change color, they'll get darker, purple, and things. That's a normal part of dying. There's lack of oxygen going there. And at some point when you're not breathing enough, remember I talked about the carbon dioxide in the blood, it's acidic. Okay, and then you're going to get the decrease in blood pressure. Then you're going to get compensation. By the time you actually get compensation in a dying person, they're unconscious. The compensation is you're going to have vasoconstriction. If the heart is still beating, it's going to try to beat faster, which oftentimes it can't. And you'll get a whole bunch of different things. I put a list of things, you know, the glutamate goes up, epinephrine goes up, vasopressin goes up. But these are kind of irrelevant because the patient's not going to feel that. But it's going to make a difference when you see that patient. You're going to see some changes. And at some point, oftentimes pulmonary arrest, the breathing stops before the heartbeat in a lot of natural deaths. And then the neuronal death and the cell death. And, you know, the brain, you know, we like to say, okay, you know, after 6 minutes, it's brain death. That's not 100% true, but what happens is if it's, let's say, 10 minutes, trying to reverse it, the oxygen alone will actually damage it. But so we'll just leave it at 6 minutes. Liver's going to live for about another 30 minutes. Corneas, tendon, bones, about 24 hours. Sperm actually lasts for about 36 hours. And then leukocytes, white blood cells, are usually the last ones. Almost up to 3 days, you'll still find 1 or 2 that are still there. But let's look at death in a terminal patient. Some people will die a natural death. Some people will die an unnatural death. In which case we say failure to thrive. In cancer, I'm not going to go over all of these. You can read them. Most of you have a copy of it. But, you know, in cancer, okay, I always used to think when I first started biology, well, how does cancer kill somebody? It's just a mass of cells. You know, an example, we had a patient. He had small cell carcinoma. His first symptom was he couldn't really swallow very well. I thought it was a gastric problem. And he had a big tumor over here. And it just basically put pressure. Now he can't eat. That was an issue. They put in a feeding tube. He was getting some nutrition. And then at some point, it just got so big, and we couldn't remove it because of the location. Eventually, it started putting pressure on the heart. The blood going back to the heart became limited, and the heart and the blood pressure kept going down. And there's another issue to that, but I'll discuss that a little bit later. But, you know, chronic lung disease. Okay, you can't breathe. You can feel like you're drowning. Renal insufficiency, renal failure at some point, you know, without the kidneys. waste products build up. There's a whole list of different things that people will die from in the unnatural state. So what happens at this point? Some patients will seek assistance in dying. They'll be like, I'm afraid, I don't want the pain, for different things. Let's go in here really, really quickly. Euthanasia, terminal sedation, and double effect. There's been a lot more interest in legal euthanasia. In the United States, there's a few states that permit it. There's countries in Europe that permit it. There's patients here that have sought it. But it's legal in some places in the world, ideally with medical supervision. But in Mexico, it is illegal. And I put in there, you notice some of this stuff is in Spanish. I'm not going to go into the whole law. What it basically says in a nutshell is in Mexico, it's illegal. There's a general medical law. It says that euthanasia is not permitted. Now, it doesn't say what happens if you do. Then there's other laws. Each state has their own laws regarding it. In Mexico City, I want to say around 2007, Mexico City legalized elective abortion up to 12 weeks. Mexico is a very religious country. There is a repercussion. And over half the states in the country now have modified their states, or their constitutions, to state that life is protected from conception to natural death. Okay. Well, does life begin at conception? That's a these are not necessarily scientific issues. These are moral issues. And what's natural death? Conception, we can actually argue that. You could say, okay, does life actually begin at conception? Well, sure it does. No, it doesn't. Okay, well, if they were alive before. Well, but now that they've joined together, they've got exclusive DNA. Now it's a new person. Okay, but you could say that for a chicken. A chicken is a new organism as soon as they join. And you get into, if you want to get philosophical for just a minute, it gets into, okay, well, but the chickens don't have a soul. Humans do. And so the soul comes into the being at conception. And that's a big religious argument, is that the soul, comes in at that point. That brings up another question. What happens in monozygotes, identical twins? They start off as one conception, and they split. So do they share their soul? You get it today, I get it tomorrow. Do they each get half of it? Do they each get a smaller one? Or does the first one out, because they don't usually come out at the same time, the first one out gets the soul and the other one gets screwed? It brings up that question. Then there's a lot of evidence, actually overwhelming, it's actually, I wouldn't even say evidence, it's just fact, that a lot of people have genetics from more than one person. And there was a case in, I think it was Massachusetts, of a woman that needed, I want to say a kidney transplant. I may be wrong on that. But anyway, they were checking genetics of her children to see if any of them would be a candidate. And it turned out that she was not the mother of her children. And what she was a chimera. And I'll explain that in a minute. Then there was another case of a woman that she was getting separated from her husband or her partner. Well, she was pregnant in her third child. So she did a paternity test with her husband, and the husband, or the man, was in fact the husband, so she could sue for child support. But what they found out was that she was not the mother of her own children. And so, and they actually thought she was committing fraud. Because she was taking them off on their income tax and everything. So then, when she actually gave birth to her child, right then and there, they drew blood and checked, and she was, again, not the mother of the child that she had just given birth to. And so what they found was that some of the cells in her body matched, some of them did not. And in this case, when they did a pap smear, they actually checked the cervix matched, her blood did not. There was also a study done just a couple years ago in the Netherlands where they autopsied and actually studied, I think it was around 64 women. And out of the 64 women, they found that there were lung tissue, heart, and I can't remember the other tissue, that actually contained cells, and they just looked for the XY. They just wanted to see if it was male or female. They didn't actually check to see exactly what it was, but it was male. There were male cells in there. There's a scientist, actually a biologist in the United States that has worked with chimeras, and I'll explain what a chimera is in a minute, for a long period of time, and he believes that up to 1 in 8 concept, for example, twins happens in about 1 in 80, 1 in 90. However, he believes, and there is strong evidence to support it, that about 1 in 8 conceptions are actually twins. And then what happens is one of them goes away. Well, does it go away? Where does it go? And it gets basically integrated into the other person. And so this brings up the whole question, okay, well then you've got 2 souls. So are these special people that, you know, it's kind of, I always wondered about these people that, and you all know them, they're really religious people. They screw everybody over, but then they're in church on Sunday. This explains it. They have 2 souls. You know, one if they lose it, they got a spare. So, you know, I'm not gonna make a religious or a philosophical issue on this, but it does raise a question as to where life begins, where it ends, who should be in charge of that. My personal opinion is actually the patient should be in charge of that. That's my personal opinion. But we have to work within the laws. So, let's talk about euthanasia just for a second. I have had more than a few patients that have come up to me and said, and these were cancer patients. One of them was a patient that he was in respiratory failure, cardiac failure, and renal failure. Needless to say, he was very close to death, and he couldn't. His biggest problem was he couldn't breathe. We had him on 2 tanks of oxygen, running him wide open, and there was just no way to get more oxygen to him. And he basically said, you know, I don't want to drown. I don't want to feel like I'm drowning. I don't want to have that panic. He said, I just want, when the time comes, I just want a little pill that I can take, and I'll go to sleep peacefully. And a lot of people have asked for that. And you can go on forums and everything, and everybody thinks that there's a little pill that'll do that. There is not. First of all, if you're that bad, at the very last minute, are you really going to be able to swallow the pill? Are you going to be able to digest it? Probably not. Cyanide? Yeah, cyanide would fit in a pill, and you could do it. It would be, there was actually somebody that researched when they were doing cyanide gas as a death penalty in the United States, and he was against it, and he basically showed the worst case scenario of somebody that was dying from cyanide. It was not pretty. It would fit in a pill, but I wouldn't advise it. Thallium, that was a common, you know, okay, a small amount to kill you. It'd be kind of slow. It wouldn't be pleasant. It wouldn't necessarily alleviate your suffering at all. The old hemlock, everybody's heard of that. You know, that was the old one. Succinylcholine, tetradotexin, which is pufferfish. There's several of these. They all work the same way. I had one guy come up to me and he told me that he used a substance on a deer when they would kill it, and it would just fall over dead. He said, I want that. And I looked it up, and it was succinylcholine. What would that do? It would paralyze your muscles. It would kill you. But you would be there for about 3 minutes, paralyzed, unable to move, unable to talk, unable to breathe. Probably not something you really want to do. Pediquat, that's used not so much here anymore. It's an herbicide. It kills you, and it kills you slowly, and you basically suffocate slowly over a period of weeks. 2 drops would kill you. But you don't want that. Overdose of medication. A lot of times people survive. And if they do survive, often there's repercussions from it. On this I didn't put gun, but you know, there are people that, you know, they say, okay, well, I'm just going to shoot myself. I know of a decent amount of people that have done that. They're still alive. I know one person, he actually has a prosthetic nose that he can take off, put back on. He's legally blind in one eye, the other eye's gone. He looks like a burn victim in the face. He lived. Other people, they've, you know, tried to aim for their heart. You know, I wouldn't go there. I would not recommend it. Reject water and food, dehydration, it takes days, very uncomfortable. Unless you're actually very unconscious and that's your directive, it's not something I would recommend. I mean, imagine going the whole day without eating and drinking. Not very comfortable. Even people that you know, do the fasting and stuff, maybe after 3 days they get used to it. But when you're sick, if you're hungry, it's a little bit more annoying. You're laying in bed. You don't have to go that way. Reject medications. I had one patient that she said that when she got that bad, she was just going to take herself off dialysis. She had lived 13 years with cancer. She was actually quite young, and she had gone through chemo. She had gone through surgery. She did everything up until the very end. And her doctor, her oncologist, said, "Well, you know, if you just stop dialysis, you'll just slowly go to sleep." I told her she would not. At one point, she did it. She went about 10, 14 days without dialysis. She started to swell up. She got quite miserable, and then she said, "Okay, I'm not going to do that again." So, you know, stopping your medications might not be a very good idea. Most of them, as well as keeping you alive, they also make you comfortable. Ideally, oh, you could go to a state, I put that in there, go to a state where it's permitted. I looked that up. I was like, okay, well, what do they do in Washington, in Oregon, in places where it's legal in the United States? What medication do they use? And it's barbiturates. Everything that I was able to find, it's barbiturates. Sacobarbital and pentobarbital, which are related to phenobarbital, which is the most commonly known one. What's it used for? What slows down the whole nervous system? You can get it here. It's you can get 200 milligrams of phenobarbital. It's good for epileptic seizures. And if somebody was having a real bad epileptic seizure, I would give them 1 or 2 tablets, 100, 200 milligrams. The amount that is prescribed for them to take themselves, it's not given to them IV, they have to take it themselves, is equivalent to about 100 to 150 tablets. They take it orally, and they take a little shake. But if you're really in that bad of a condition, can you do it? No, not really. It's not used as often as a lot of people think it is. Bottom line, for somebody living here in Mexico, at this point in time, it is illegal. So that brings up a whole other thing. But what can I do that is legal? Mexico has had a reputation for not really caring too much about pain. It's changing a little bit. It's changed a little bit more after 2009. But traditionally, of all of Latin America, use of opioid drugs, Mexico is second to the worst. They just don't use it. You go have surgery, oh, here's your paracetamol, which, Tylenol. It's the idea of actually giving someone Dilaudid, which is the brand name used north of the border for hydromorphone, very rarely used, very rarely used. It's changing a little bit. There's a misconception that you have to be an anesthesiologist, you have to be some sort of specialist in order to prescribe these drugs. That is not true. It used to be that you had to print the prescriptions yourself, make them to specs. You had to take them down to Guadalajara. They would give you 100 stickers, which was sufficient for 50 prescriptions. You would write them. Then you would have to go back down there, show them your block that you would use. It was a little bit time-consuming, but anybody could do it. Then a couple years ago, they actually made it easier. You can do it all online, and you can actually download the prescription. Any doctor can do it. Now, of course, if they don't keep good records or something, they technically could lose that right. But any doctor can write prescriptions for controlled medications. Morphine is available here. It's relatively cheap. Fentanyl is available here, and it's very cheap. The patches are very expensive. The injectable is very cheap. Hydromorphone, which is Dilaudid, it's available here. Methadone, it's available here. There's a few other weaker ones that are also available here, but they're available. So there's no reason for anybody to actually really have to suffer. So basically, I go down here. Legal option. In 2014, the Mexican government wrote standards for palliative care. And if nothing else, they did 2 things that are very, very important. They recognize what is called terminal sedation and the double effect. Terminal sedation, remember I told you about this guy that had the cancer and he was pushing on the heart? We'd already discussed it. At some point, he couldn't even breathe enough to move. You think now, okay, well, if I go run across the street, I'm going to be winded. Imagine getting winded just sitting up in bed and then not having enough air to be able to breathe. And so, can we terminally sedate him? Yes, legally we can. We can give him enough, it depends on what you want to use. You can use midazolam in a high dose because the metabolites and the preservatives don't cause other problems. But you can give him, he can go to sleep until he dies of natural causes. We can do that. That's a legal option in Mexico. The other thing that can be done, they've got here the double effect. What is the double effect? Oftentimes you will use a medication to make the patient more comfortable. That's the intention. It may kill them, But the intention is not to kill them. The intention is to make them more comfortable. That is legal. As long as the intention was to make them comfortable and there's a justification for that, you can do that. Oftentimes it may be, too much morphine, this or that. It could be something as much as, maybe they're swelling up and they need a diuretic, a water pill, but the diuretic is going to, do damage to their kidneys and they're going to die from that. Which you do. Make them comfortable. And we can do that. Those are legal options here in Mexico. Let's talk just a little bit, I noticed on here, I put the reality. Many who could benefit from professional care will instead receive inadequate care, which is the truth. Oftentimes people think that, oh, well, I've got this person in charge, I've got this person, my doctor or this or that. I've seen lawyers, I have seen doctors, and I have seen friends betray patients. Why? Usually it's money. Very, very often it's money. Be careful who you trust. Palliative care, and I've got to wind this up quickly because I know we're running out of time. The big goal of palliative care is to avoid suffering. Suffering, we could say pain or panic. Pain, there was a book, it was written by Paul Brand, and it was called Pain, the Gift Nobody Wants. And I just looked at it, I said, that's a stupid book, I don't really want to read it. And I did read it. It was a very interesting book. He was born in 1914. He went to medical school in England during World War II. Then he worked most of his life working with leprosy in India, which obviously leprosy destroys some nerves and then you have issues. He's well known because he worked in tendon transplants to allow people to actually open their hand, not just close them again. But he wrote a lot of things that were very interesting about the necessity of pain. He talks about, surgeries that he did, meticulous surgeries of the hand, and then somebody went home and a rat ate part of their hand off. Because they couldn't feel it, and they would have to have a cat. If they didn't have a cat with them, things would happen. The cats didn't do that, the rats would. And, but he eventually moved to the United States, and in the United States, it's closed now to my knowledge. There was a leprosy center in, I think it was Mississippi. There isn't much U.S. funding for leprosy. There isn't much leprosy in the United States. But there's a lot of diabetes, and the same thing happens to the nerves. You lose feeling. So he got some grants, and he would actually design, in one case, he designed a machine that would be harnessed onto somebody that would give them shocks when certain parts were hit too hard. And he very vividly wrote about one person who was working on a motorcycle, and how he was hitting a wrench, and of course he was getting shocks. So he just turned the machine off so he could sit there and continue doing what he needed to do and wouldn't feel the pain. And at that point, he realized it's very essential that pain cannot be turned off. It's not something, it's to protect us. And if we can just turn it off, we will, conveniently. So it's very important. However, in disease states, oftentimes it goes wrong, and it must be modified unnaturally. Drugs, opioids, whatever we can use to do so. Unnaturally regulated, as I put. Okay.
So we're going to keep going, right? This is the time that we usually, we've taken questions and we end it. But today we're going to run longer. So for any of you who need to leave at this time and can't stay, please just leave as quietly as you can and kind of work your way around through the back. But we're probably going to go another
5. I think we can wrap this up in 5 to 10
minutes.
5 or 10 minutes.
If he says 5, it's 10, I believe.
That's usually the case.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go over to the next page real quick. Remember I told you in the first page about the stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I won't go into that too much right now, other than stage 3 is bargaining. At that stage, most people are very vulnerable. They will go after anything to try to help them through whatever they're doing. At that stage, a lot of people will try to sell them medications, treatments. You'll find all sorts of alternative stuff. Most of it doesn't work. But then it gets into, well, should somebody tell you what you can do and what you can't do? An example, the FDA in the United States, or cocaine-free, which is the equivalent to it here in Mexico, will say, okay, well, this one is, we can use that for cancer, this one's not approved. or this one you can use for pulmonary fibrosis, this one is not approved. It's good that the FDA, Kofi Priest, whoever is the governing board, research and inform us. It's very important. It's very useful information. But sometimes there's a right to try the drug versus the legality of the drug. And I think it's the northern state, Minnesota, I think, that they're trying to do a right to try act, which basically says patients, especially terminal patients, have the right to try this drug even though it's not proven to do anything, because who knows, it might work. Give you an example real quick. There was a case in 2004. There's a drug, pyrphonidone. It was being sold out of Canada by Big Mountain Drugs to people in the United States for pulmonary fibrosis. The FDA wrote a very nasty letter to them saying that this drug was not approved. They had no knowledge that it would even do anything. Therefore, stopped selling it to citizens within the United States. Several months later, the FDA approved the drug. You know, okay, so what about the people that may have died or could have benefited between the time that the FDA withheld the drug from them? There's a lot of, we could go into this, we could have a debate for a long time. But the bottom line is, I think everybody should have the right to try any medication they want. However, be very careful. There's a lot of medication out there that doesn't work, and a lot of people will say it does. I had somebody come to me and say that they were told by somebody that had a health food store that I think it was Hopkins was no longer using chemotherapy or radiation because they were now using just marijuana. And let me just go into that, just touch on it very, very quickly. Medical marijuana, there is marijuana for pain. There's evidence that it does work. There's a lot of people that will say, well, marijuana can't be patented, therefore Big Pharma is keeping us from having marijuana. Actually, all of these are patents on processes to extract parts of marijuana. One of them is a British patent for a glioma, it's a brain tumor. Another one here is for just metastasis in general. There is interest in it. And if it worked, somebody would be very, very rich. So anybody that tells you that a certain medication could cure everything without showing you the facts, just be careful. Just be careful. Especially if it's expensive, be very careful. All right, let's go on to planning, which I think a lot of people are more interested in this than anything else. Planning needs to be based off of a lot of different things. Education of the person, the culture, religious belief, knowledge, experience. Bottom line is your wishes. It's about doing what you want to do when the time comes. And in the U.S. or north of the border, and I know some people are actually from overseas, truly overseas. The United States and Canada is not overseas, in my opinion, because there's no sea between the U.S. and Canada. But anyway, there's funeral home pre-arrangement. A lot of funeral homes here will offer that. It does not have to be prepaid. You may want to change your mind at the last minute. Funeral homes here are relatively cheap for the most part. Don't let them con you into, okay, you got to prepay us. You can pre-arrange. You can have everything set up. And I'm not going to go into which one you should or should not use. Will, last will, testament. Then we got advanced healthcare declaration, healthcare directive, personal directive. What's the difference? Each state, each area usually just gives a different name to them. They basically amount to pretty much the same thing. Durable power of attorney, what's the difference? In English, power of attorney gives somebody rights to do something on your behalf. Maybe sell your house, take care of your house, do something specific. Durable power of attorney is pretty much, covers almost everything, and including after you're dead. What about in Mexico? They still revolve around what's called the 5 wishes, which is, the first one is, who do you want to be in control? Who do you want to make your decisions for you? Specifying the kind of medical treatments you do or do not want. Communicating, if you want to be very comfortable, do you prefer to be conscious? Do you prefer a combination? One day you'll be sedated, the next day you can watch TV, even though you're going to be in pain. Express what you want. Expressing how you want to be treated, informing what you want others to know. Do you want your whole family to know the whole history? Do you want them to only know part of it? The first two, naming who to make your decisions, of what care, when you can't, that's a legal document here in Mexico and other places. Specifying the kind of medical treatment you want or do not want, that's also a legal document. Here, it'll be a document that you will need to have notarized at a notariate. And the names that they use here in Mexico, I put a couple of them there. The one that's most common here is authorization para decisiones médicas. But it'll say, okay, well, who do you want to make those decisions? Who are you naming? What medical decision? Everything, and when? At what point? And then I go into the Carta de Poder, which is power of attorney, medical, okay, it pertains to this person has full power to do whatever they want in this case, and then the will. The will and the medical decisions paper should be two separate things. In Mexico, you have the right to, you can have a will, you can have the health document, which should be separate. You have the right to give instructions about your own health care, and you have the right to have somebody else make your health care decisions for you, which technically could be two different documents, but to keep it simple, to keep the confusion down, it should be one. And I've got an example of it in here. Oftentimes, you'll notice that some of the places will have one that's already made up. Left hand is Spanish, right hand is in English. And a lot of people say, okay, well, I do want to be cremated, I don't want to be cremated, and they rewrite it. You can make more than that. You can make more changes than that. Whatever's done in English has to be reflected on the Spanish side, but you can make more changes. And I actually made one that has more changes in it, or more options. And then as far as the will, that's a good thing, but there's something I want to bring up here, and then I'll go into the two forms really quickly, and then we'll be done, or we'll go into questions. A lot of people have a paper that says, okay, in this situation, I want this, and I want this. I have the money to do it. Then they're incapacitated. Okay, we know what they want. Who's going to pay for it? Their money's in the bank. They can do whatever they want, except that money has to go from there to here. That's a very important thing. Without it, things aren't going to happen. That's a very important part that everybody needs. They can have their will. Okay, well, when I'm dead, I want this. This person's in charge of this. This person's the executor of the estate. But who's going to pay for your medical treatment? When you're unconscious, who's paying for your morphine? Who's paying for this? You've got to be very specific. You need to have your power of attorneys and everything done as well. So let's just go on to the back page real quick. This used to all fit on one page. It was very simple. I added a little bit more to it. I tend to do that. I take simple things and modify them. And where did I get the ideas? From the same thing, but in the U.S. There were several lawyers that had written up a few, and I said, well, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. And I put them together. So down here, a lot of times where it says I do not want CPR, I don't want medical intubation, all this was actually joined as one big paragraph. Well, some people want part of one, they don't want it all. So what I did here is I put them separately, and I also said, okay, initial it, which makes it a little bit more formal. I have seen documents that the patients have written, and they had them notarized, and they came back, and the wording was changed, and it was notarized with their signature on it. I have seen that here. So with this, it makes it a little bit more specific what you actually do want. Otherwise, they'll say, oh, we didn't do anything because he didn't want it. Oh, but by the way, now I have his money. Be careful. Initial which ones apply, and I got the original from notary number 5. You could use 2. I'm not familiar really with 3 or 4 that much. And then there's also number 1. But you can use whichever one you want. I just happen to get the information from notary number 5. That's why in the will it says notary number 5. But if you want CPR, leave it alone. If you don't want it, initial it. I don't want mechanical respiration. I don't want intubated. I don't want blood. I don't want a transfusion. Any of these that you do not want, go ahead and put your initials on it. Then it says here, I understand that if I did not initial, they might actually give me that treatment. So it's implied that you accept that. And then a lot of these it said on there, I do not wish to be cremated. It was a general form, and they would just go in there and change it. Well, there's always the possibility that you don't want to be cremated, but you got the certificate that said I do want. So I basically put that where it says, okay, I do want, I do not want. It's very clear. And then I added a little thing at the bottom, which is not usually a big problem in Mexico, but if you've got, whoever, it could be your doctor, it could be your family, in charge of this. I put that little disclaimer at the bottom. Hopefully it'll help in the future. Hopefully it's not an issue right now. But if somebody does not do everything possible to save your life, and that's what you want, this kind of relieves them of any guilt. Legally, maybe in the future, but if nothing else, it also relieves them of guilt. And then the last one on the back is very close to what they had. I just made a few modifications to it. And this is the will in Mexico. If you own property in another country, you need a will in that country. If you own property in Mexico, as a lot do, house or whatever, this is very necessary, and it's pretty much self-explanatory. The other thing, if you have this, you have the other paper, and you fall over right here, how do we know you have it? Where is it? I didn't put that on here, but it's very important to have an emergency card in your pocket. The first place we're going to look for is going to be in the wallet. Second place, if we don't know anything about you, we'll look in your cell phone. But an emergency card saying where this stuff can be found, where your medical history can be found, is very, very useful. So, anyway, go ahead. We'll do.
Thank you. How do you prepare?
Wait a minute, please. We're going to bring you a mic so that everybody can hear your question.
Appreciate this. I really want to know this.
Okay, so we're going to go to the question period. Again, if for those of you that need to leave at this time, if you want to just go around through the back and be as quiet as possible, and we'll do questions just for a few minutes.
How do you prepare the family and the patient so they can go through a good death program? And that's critical.
It is critical.
I'm a physician and I know.
Okay. As a doctor, how do we prepare them? Or as a patient? As a patient, usually the patient, as the stages go, the patient needs to communicate with the family. I have seen patients where, an example, two people in the family knew everything, and they came down and took care of it, and the person's children didn't know anything about it until the person actually was dead, and they were like, what happened? It's all about communication, and be honest. Too many people will sugarcoat things and say, oh, he's got a little breathing problem, he's got a little heart problem. No, be honest. Everybody should communicate what it is, what the problem is, and what the prognosis is. Is the person likely to have this for years? If not, if the person is likely going to die, everybody should be honest with the rest of their family.
Other questions? Down here in front? See if we can get a mic over here. Perfect.
Hi there. What do you think of that case in Oakland of that little girl who was declared brain dead, has a death certificate, but they've been pumping air into her for 2 years?
That's a good question. I don't know the case, actually. I'm not familiar with the case. But it gets into, the whole cryogenics. We have somebody that's frozen, and they hope that, maybe in the future they'll come up with a cure or whatever. You get into brain death, I'm just going to spend a minute real quickly on it. They're pumping oxygen. She's got oxygen right now. At some point, we assume that there was some damage done. The damage, half the damage, I'm going to do it very simply. Half the damage is from the lack of oxygen. The other half of the damage is actually when the person gets the oxygen back, the damage that's done to the brain, what they call reperfusion injury. It happens to the heart, it happens to the brain. And there are medications being developed for that can limit that. I guess bottom line is somebody's really holding on to hope. And, maybe there is some, maybe there's not. There comes a point where you have to let go, but when somebody's dying, one of the biggest things that I see in the line of fraud, not saying that this is people that will sell you hope. And there's a lot of people that will buy it. But I don't know the case to really give you an honest answer.
Over here.
Thank you. Could you say something about helium?
Helium?
Yes. Helium gas
I'm not...
as a way to, because, I think the Hemlock Society has said something about helium.
Okay,
It's a
for
very
dying.
simple, painless way to create
Helium would displace the oxygen to some extent. Now, helium's a very light gas, so it's probably not going to do it to a large extent. I don't know about helium. I do know about tetrafluoroethane. Tetrafluoroethane is also known as 134A. It's a refrigerant gas which scavenges carbon dioxide. And there has been some talk about people doing that, which would give them a very painless death. The problem is trying to do it by yourself. Oftentimes, a lot of these would need help, and that implicates another person. If it's in a place where it's legal, it would probably work very, very well. When it's done in a place where it's not illegal, oftentimes you implicate other people, and you'll be gone, but then people are going to ask questions from surviving members.
Loretta, right here.
Thank you, Dr. Sam, for showing us how complex dying really is and all the things we need to think about. The eating and drinking issue, in my observation, it's a natural part of the natural dying process is that people lose interest in nutrition and hydration.
Yeah.
And you mentioned voluntarily stopping eating and drinking.
Yeah.
And if a person did choose to do that when they were having suffering existentially or physically, would palliative care support them through that process?
Yes, yes, it would.
And we have, I think, one more question here.
When you mentioned about the parts of the body that live longer after death, I started thinking about cremation. I was like, oh, I don't want to be cremated before my whole body's dead.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing that you brought that up. The parts that would last the longest, obviously, sperm, which half of people don't have to worry about that. The other would be the white blood cells, which you would only have a few remaining. However, it does bring up the issue, well, somebody could just appear dead and, In Mexico, it is a law, I think it's 24 hours before they can actually cremate the body. So the body will have to wait that amount of time. And you could put that in here, say, I want 48 hours. The funeral home may not want to have you around that long, but you could specify that.
Okay, thank you, everybody. That's all we have time for today. You can come up and talk to Dr. Sam. Please join us next week. Reading War and Peace and the challenges of that. Please pick up your cups, stack your chairs, turn on your cell phone.